The alarm went off at 5:45 a.m. Ethan didn't move. The sound kept ringing through the dark bedroom, cutting through the quiet like a tiny alarm bell no one else could hear. Outside his apartment window, the city was still asleep. No traffic, no footsteps, just a faint blue darkness stretching across the sky. His hand reached for the phone. Snooze. 9 more minutes. He rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. 9 minutes later, the alarm rang again. Snooze. This had been Ethan's morning routine for years. Not intentionally, just quietly, automatically. At 34, Ethan had a life most people would describe as fine. He worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. Decent salary, clean apartment, gym membership he used occasionally, friends who met for drinks on Fridays. Nothing was wrong, but nothing was really moving either. And that invisible stillness had started to bother him more than failure ever could. Because failure is loud. Failure forces change. Drifting does the opposite. Drifting feels comfortable while slowly stealing direction. Ethan noticed it most during conversations with people who were building something. A startup, a podcast, a skill, a new career move. Whenever those conversations happened, Ethan would smile, nod, and say the same line he had repeated for 3 years. Yeah, I've been thinking about doing something like that. Thinking, not building, not committing, just thinking. Over time, that small difference started doing something strange to his confidence. It didn't disappear overnight. It faded quietly, like ink slowly washing out of a page. At work, he had ideas in meetings, but waited too long to say them. When opportunities appeared, he hesitated half a second longer than everyone else. When people asked what he wanted to do next with his life, he answered with vague plans that sounded convincing but meant nothing. And the worst part, no one called him out. His boss thought he was reliable. His friends thought he was easygoing. His family thought he was stable. But Ethan knew the truth. Inside his head, something had started whispering a dangerous sentence. Maybe you're just not the kind of person who builds things. That sentence didn't scream. It repeated quietly, every day. Then one evening something small happened. Small, but irritating enough to stick. Ethan stayed late at the office finishing a presentation that should have taken 30 minutes. Instead, it took 2 hours. Not because the work was difficult, but because his attention kept breaking. Phone, email, Slack, random news article, back to slides, then phone again. His focus felt like a cracked windshield, splitting into smaller pieces every few minutes. Around 9:30 p.m., the office lights dimmed as the building switched into night mode. Most people had already left. The only other person on the floor was Marcus, one of the senior designers. Marcus walked past Ethan's desk, glanced at his screen and stopped. "You still here?" Ethan laughed softly, trying to finish this deck. Marcus looked at the slides, then at Ethan. Then he said something strange. "You know why your brain feels slow right now?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it's late?" Marcus shook his head. "No, because your brain has already spent the entire day reacting." He leaned on the desk for a moment. Emails told you what to do. Notifications told you what to read. Meetings told you what to think about. He pointed at the screen. By the time you start real work, your attention is already exhausted. Ethan frowned slightly. Marcus straightened up. "People think confidence comes from success." He paused. "It doesn't." Then he added one more sentence before walking away. "Confidence comes from controlling the first decisions of your day." The words were simple, but they followed Ethan all the way home. That night his apartment felt unusually quiet. He sat on the couch without turning on the lights. Marcus's sentence replayed again. "Controlling the first decisions of your day." Ethan started thinking about his mornings. Alarm. Snooze. Phone. Messages. News. Scrolling. More scrolling. Then rushing. Coffee. Traffic. Work. Every morning began the same way. Not with intention. With reaction. Before he even left his bed, the world had already entered his mind. Other people's priorities. Other people's updates. Other people's noise. And somewhere in that noise, his own direction disappeared. Ethan leaned his head back and stared at the ceiling. What if confidence had nothing to do with talent? What if it had everything to do with control? Control of time. Control of attention. Control of the first moments of the day, before the world arrived. Because if someone cannot control the first 15 minutes after waking up, how can they expect to control a year? That thought stayed with him when he went to sleep. At 5:45 a.m., the alarm rang again. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't hit snooze immediately. He stared at the ceiling. The room was dark. His brain started negotiating instantly. You slept late. You can start tomorrow. This doesn't matter. But another quieter thought appeared. Just stand up. He sighed and swung his legs off the bed. The floor felt cold. The apartment was silent. Outside the window, the horizon was still dark blue. The city hadn't started moving yet. No cars, no voices, no pressure, just stillness. Ethan walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. Then he sat at the small desk near the window. For a moment, he had no idea what to do. 15 empty minutes felt strangely uncomfortable. His instinct was to grab his phone, but he didn't. Instead, he opened a notebook that had been sitting unused on his desk for almost a year. The first page was blank. Blank pages are intimidating because they don't allow pretending. They ask honest questions. What are you actually building? What direction are you choosing? Ethan held the pen for a moment. Then he wrote one sentence. If I control the first 15 minutes of my day, maybe the rest of my life will stop drifting. The sentence looked simple, almost childish. But something inside him shifted when he wrote it, because he suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Confidence doesn't come from speeches. It comes from evidence. Evidence that you can keep promises to yourself. And Ethan had broken hundreds of those promises. Start tomorrow. Wake earlier. Focus more. Learn the skill. Finish the project. Each broken promise had trained his brain to doubt him. So maybe rebuilding confidence didn't require a dramatic life overhaul. Maybe it required something much smaller, something quiet, something repeatable. 15 minutes before sunrise. Not for productivity, not for achievement, for proof. Proof that he could direct at least one piece of his life. Because if a person cannot lead 15 minutes, they will never lead years. And Ethan was about to discover something most people never realize. Confidence is not built in big public moments. It's built in small private victories no one else ever sees. The next morning, the alarm rang again at 5:45. This time the resistance appeared faster. You already did it once. That's enough. Sleep more. But Ethan sat up anyway. The second morning felt awkward. The third morning felt irritating. By the fourth morning, the real battle started. His brain produced a sharper thought. You'll quit this in a week. That sentence landed hard, because it sounded true. Ethan had started many things before. Workout plans, online courses, side projects, all abandoned quietly, which revealed a brutal truth most people avoid. Your brain doesn't believe your goals. It believes your history. And Ethan's history said one thing clearly. He quits. So on the fifth morning when the alarm rang, the decision felt heavier. He stared at the ceiling. The room was still dark. Standing up now meant something different. Not just waking early, but rewriting the story his brain believed about him. Stay in bed and confirm the old identity. Stand up and challenge it. For almost a full minute he didn't move. Then he whispered something to himself. Just 15 minutes. He pushed the blanket aside, sat up, walked to the desk. Outside the horizon was beginning to glow faintly. A thin line of orange light cutting through the darkness. 15 minutes before sunrise. He opened the notebook again, but this time he didn't write a statement. He wrote a question. What would a person with real self-trust do with 15 quiet minutes? The question stayed on the page, because suddenly those 15 minutes felt powerful. No noise, no expectations, no performance, just choice. And choice, repeated every day, slowly becomes identity. Ethan didn't fully understand it yet, but he had stepped into a small pocket of time where something rare could grow. Direction. And direction, when protected daily, begins to create something stronger than motivation. Authority over your own life. Most people wake up when the world demands them. Very few wake up before the world arrives. Those 15 minutes were starting to separate the two. The sixth morning felt heavier than the first 5. Not because Ethan was tired. Because now his brain understood what was happening. A pattern was forming, and patterns are dangerous to the version of you that prefers comfort. The alarm rang at 5:45 a.m. His eyes opened slowly. The room was dark again, quiet again. The city still asleep, but something had changed. This time the resistance didn't whisper. It argued. You proved the point already. You woke up 5 days in a row. That's enough discipline. Ethan lay there staring at the ceiling. His mind was searching for a loophole, a reasonable excuse, because excuses rarely sound lazy inside your own head. They sound logical. But then another thought surfaced. If you stop now, you confirm the old story. He exhaled slowly, then sat up. The floor felt cold again. The air felt still, and the small desk near the window waited in silence. He poured water, opened the notebook, sat down. 15 minutes. No audience, no applause, just repetition. And repetition started doing something strange to his brain. At first, those mornings had felt like effort. Now they began to feel like territory. A small piece of time the world couldn't invade. No Slack notifications, no news feeds, no opinions, just quiet ownership of attention. On the 7th morning, Ethan noticed something interesting. His mind felt clearer, not magically focused, but less scattered. Like a glass of water after the dirt settles. He wrote a new sentence in the notebook. Confidence might be the byproduct of daily self-respect. He stared at the line, because suddenly a memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, his manager had asked if anyone wanted to lead a small client presentation. Ethan had considered raising his hand, but he didn't. Not because he lacked the ability, because he doubted himself for half a second. And half a second is enough for someone else to speak first. Moments like that had repeated throughout his career. Tiny hesitations, small withdrawals, nothing dramatic, but enough to slowly convince his brain that leadership belonged to other people. Now he wondered something different. What if those hesitations weren't personality traits? What if they were the result of broken internal trust? Because when your brain doesn't trust you, it avoids risk, it avoids speaking, it avoids stepping forward, not out of fear of others, but fear of your own inconsistency. Ethan closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten. The first faint orange line appeared again on the horizon. Sunrise was still 15 minutes away, and a realization quietly landed. Those 15 minutes weren't about productivity. They were about evidence. Evidence that he could show up for himself even when no one required it. Evidence that he could direct his own attention. Evidence that he could finish something small every day. And confidence, he realized, is simply the accumulation of evidence. Not hype, not motivation, proof. But the real breakthrough happened on the 12th morning. That morning, Ethan didn't feel resistance. He felt boredom. And boredom is where most habits die. Because the brain loves novelty. But identity grows through repetition. He sat at the desk staring at the notebook, feeling the urge to skip the ritual entirely. You've already built the habit. Missing one day won't matter. His mind sounded convincing, which made him suspicious. So instead of arguing with the thought, Ethan wrote something new in the notebook. 3 simple lines. Rule 1. Wake before the world touches your attention. Rule 2. Protect 15 minutes of uninterrupted focus. Rule 3. Leave proof on paper every morning. He stared at the rules. They weren't dramatic. They weren't ambitious. But they were clear. And clarity removes negotiation. From that morning forward, the ritual became simpler. Wake up, water, notebook, write something. Sometimes it was a thought, sometimes a question, sometimes a single sentence. But the page was never empty. And slowly, something unexpected started happening during the rest of his day. In meetings, Ethan noticed he spoke earlier. Not louder, earlier, before doubt had time to grow. During work sessions, he focused longer without grabbing his phone. Not perfectly, but noticeably. And one afternoon, something surprising happened. His manager paused during a planning meeting. We need someone to present this strategy to the client on Thursday. The room went quiet. Ethan felt the familiar hesitation rising again. That half-second pause. The same pause that had controlled so many decisions before. But this time, something inside him felt different. Not confident, just stable, like a chair with 4 solid legs instead of 3. His hand lifted. I can present it. The words came out calmly, not forced, not dramatic, just direct. His manager nodded. Great. It's yours. The meeting continued. But Ethan barely heard the rest, because something important had just happened. Not the opportunity, the speed of the decision. For the first time in years, hesitation hadn't won. And later that evening, while walking home through the city, Ethan finally understood why. It wasn't courage. It was evidence. For 12 mornings in a row, he had kept a promise to himself. That small pattern had quietly told his brain something new. You show up. You finish what you start. You keep your word. And the brain believes patterns more than intentions. But just as things started improving, the setback arrived. Because growth rarely moves in straight lines. It was a Tuesday night. A long one. The presentation deadline was approaching, and Ethan stayed at the office until almost midnight refining slides. By the time he reached his apartment, exhaustion hit hard. He collapsed into bed, without even setting the alarm. When morning came, sunlight was already filling the room. 8:12 a.m. His stomach dropped. The notebook sat untouched on the desk. The alarm had never rung. For a moment the old voice returned instantly. See? You always break the streak eventually. Maybe the habit wasn't real after all. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The same crossroads appeared again. Quit quietly, and confirm the old identity. Or respond differently. Because confidence is not built by perfect streaks. It's built by how fast you recover after breaking them. Ethan stood up, walked to the desk, opened the notebook, and wrote one sentence across the page. Missing a day is an accident. Missing two is a decision. He closed the notebook, set the alarm again. 5:45 a.m. Tomorrow the evidence would continue. The alarm rang at 5:45 a.m. Ethan opened his eyes immediately. Not because he suddenly loved waking up early, but because something inside him had changed shape. 3 weeks earlier, that sound meant interruption. Now it meant ownership. He sat up slowly and looked around the room. The apartment was still dark. The quiet felt familiar now, almost protective, like the world hadn't started demanding things from him yet. He walked to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and sat at the desk near the window. The notebook opened to yesterday's sentence. Missing a day is an accident. Missing two is a decision. He read it once. Then he turned the page. Outside, the horizon was still dark blue. The sun hadn't started rising yet. That thin line of light would appear in a few minutes. 15 minutes. That was the entire system. Not a life overhaul. Not a complex morning routine. Just a boundary. A boundary between Ethan and the noise of the world. He wrote another sentence. Confidence grows when your brain stops questioning whether you'll show up. That line stayed with him all morning. Because something had started happening beneath the surface of his life. Small things. Quiet things. But undeniable. At work he noticed people listening when he spoke. Not because he was louder. Because he spoke without that tiny hesitation that used to delay him. His focus had improved too. Tasks that once stretched for hours were now finishing faster. Not perfectly. Not effortlessly. But cleaner. More deliberate. And the strange part? No one knew why. His coworkers didn't see the notebook. His boss didn't know about the sunrise ritual. To everyone else, Ethan simply looked more confident. But Ethan understood the real mechanism. Confidence hadn't appeared. It had been constructed. Brick by brick. Morning by morning. Each sunrise quietly telling his brain something new. You follow through. You don't negotiate with yourself. You show up. The outside world began responding to that shift. But the deeper change happened internally. Because confidence is not about believing you'll always succeed. It's believing you'll show up again even if you fail. That belief is built through evidence. And evidence only comes from repetition. One Friday afternoon, Ethan walked out of the office after successfully delivering the client presentation. 3 weeks ago, that moment would have felt impossible. Now it felt natural. Not easy, but earned. His manager even stopped him near the elevators. That presentation was strong, she said. You should lead more of those. Ethan thanked her and stepped inside the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the metal panel. Same face, same job, same city. But internally something had shifted. He trusted himself slightly more than he did last month. And that trust didn't come from talent. It came from a habit nobody saw. The elevator doors opened. The city outside buzzed with the usual noise. Traffic, conversations, horns, movement everywhere. But Ethan realized something as he walked through the crowded street. Most people were already exhausted by the world's demands. Their attention had been captured the moment they woke up. Phones, notifications, urgency. And once your attention is owned by the world, your direction slowly disappears. That's why confidence feels rare, because control is rare, and control begins earlier than people think. The next morning, Ethan woke again before sunrise. The ritual felt normal now. He opened the notebook and flipped through the previous pages. Short sentences, small reflections, questions, ideas, evidence. Every page represented a morning where he had chosen direction over drift. He realized something powerful while reading them. The habit itself wasn't magical. The timing wasn't magical. The real transformation came from one decision repeated daily. Choosing to lead your own attention. Most people wait for motivation. But motivation is unreliable. It appears when it wants, and disappears when life gets busy. Habits are different. Habits remove negotiation. And when negotiation disappears, identity forms. Ethan looked out the window as the first orange light finally cut across the horizon. Sunrise. 15 minutes had passed again. Another page filled. Another promise kept. And suddenly the entire idea became clear. Real confidence isn't loud. It doesn't come from speeches, hype, or temporary motivation. Real confidence is quiet. It grows in moments nobody sees. It grows when you keep small promises repeatedly until your brain stops doubting you. It grows when your actions become predictable to yourself. Because once your brain trusts your pattern, it stops hesitating. It stops negotiating. It starts moving. And that is when direction replaces drifting. That is when opportunities stop feeling intimidating. That is when speaking up feels natural instead of forced. All from 15 quiet minutes before the world wakes up. Ethan closed the notebook and set it down. The sun was fully rising now. The city was starting to move. But he had already completed the most important decision of the day. He had proven to himself again that he could lead his own life in small ways. And small leadership repeated daily eventually becomes big leadership. If there is one truth most people misunderstand, it's this: confidence is not a personality trait. It is a record your brain keeps about how often you keep your word. Every broken promise weakens it. Every kept promise strengthens it. That means confidence is not something you search for. It is something you document through action, day after day, morning after morning. So if you want real confidence, don't start by chasing big goals. Start smaller. Protect 15 minutes before the world arrives. No phone, no noise, no reaction. Just you deciding the first direction of your day. Because when you lead your first 15 minutes, you begin leading your hours, then your weeks, then eventually your life. And one morning, without realizing when it happened, you'll wake up with something far more powerful than motivation. You'll wake up with self-trust. And once a person truly trusts themselves, confidence stops being something they try to feel. It becomes something they naturally carry.